Welcome back to our third and final technique here for today. We are going to show you now how to use color flow or royal icing to make a little icing plaque. So this technique, the first one that we did with the piping gel was pretty quick. You could do it immediately and decorate your cake. The second one with our icing that we froze in the freezer, you would use maybe 15-20 minutes before you put it on the cake, or you could do it overnight, things like that. And then this technique takes about a day to dry. So you want to make sure that you have plenty of time for this technique. Again, we're going to get our pattern, put it on a piece of cake board or cardboard or something, take our wax paper and put it on top. Now with the color flow or the royal icing, for this method, you could use the parchment paper, and I'll show you why sometimes I prefer to use the parchment paper. The difference between color flow and royal icing, color flow dries a little bit shinier, a little bit harder. It just works really well for this kind of technique. You can buy a small little bottle. It's called color flow. It's a powder form, and you would just add it to your icing mix. It's powdered sugar, water, and color flow. And you can find a recipe for that on my website or just anywhere online. The royal icing is just meringue powder, powdered sugar, and water, and meringue powder is pretty much just dried egg whites. Or you could use real egg whites, just depends on how you feel about that. Okay, so we have our pattern ready to go. Then we've got our royal icing here. I'm using royal icing today. And royal icing or meringue or color flow is a really interesting icing. It dries really quickly, and so you want to make sure that anytime you make up any icing that you're not using, that you cover it with plastic wrap, cover it with a container lid, and just make sure that it's all sealed up so it can't dry out on you. Your bags as well. Every time I use color flow or royal icing and I'm not using my bag for the moment, I will put it underneath like a damp towel or something to keep it from drying out inside of my tips. Okay, so we're going to be using a much larger tip this time. We've been using number 2 and number 3. This one is a number 5. And the reason why you want to use a much larger tip is because you are going to do an outline with the stiff royal icing or color flow, and then you're going to thin that down with some water and flow it into your pattern. And so in order for the color flow or the royal icing that's thinned down not to go over the border that you've already created, you want to make sure it's a nice thick border, really tall, and so I like to use a bigger tip for that. Okay. This is not one of those patterns that you can get too technical and detailed with again, but the fun thing about it is because it dries so hard, you can go back and add those details with edible food markers, with your icing, anything that you want to do. So don't worry about not getting every single detail in there. You can always go back after it dries and put it all in. Okay, so again, we're going to copy our pattern. And you want to make sure that this is a nice, thick outline here so that your icing can flow into it. You want to make sure it comes in good contact with your, and I'm going to take this off of here because it's spinning it around. There we go. You want to make sure it comes in contact with your wax paper or your parchment paper. Now I mentioned before that I was going to tell you why sometimes I prefer parchment paper to wax paper, and that is because with this technique of letting it dry, the wax paper sometimes will stick very well, which is good, but stick very well to your icing plaque. And so if you want to make sure that you can get it off without breaking it, I sometimes use the parchment paper, because the parchment paper with the little silicone layer on it, it will just pop right off as soon as it's dry. So with that too, you want to make sure that you're careful about how you transport or handle your dried piece of color flow or royal icing, because it will fall right off of there and while you're moving it around and break on you. So this one too is another technique that you may want to make 2 or 3 of these, because when you try to get it off of your wax paper or parchment paper, if it does break, which it can if it's too thin, then you'll have a backup and you won't have to worry about it breaking on you. This technique, however, I know the other ones that we've done, we usually, I've told you to do the letters and things like that backwards. This one, this is going to be your face up pattern right here, and so you want to make sure that you do the letters and everything the right way on this technique. But you do get a nice flat look to the back side, and so if you want to have a flat looking letters, then you can go ahead and do them backwards, whatever you prefer. Again, if you have little parts that you want to make them look neater and nicer, you can just take your paintbrush, and this, again, you want it to be dry to make sure that you don't fiddle with the consistency of this border. You'll want to let this border dry for a few minutes before you flow in your thinned down color flow or royal icing. So while this dries, I'm going to show you how to thin down your royal icing. A little bit really goes a long way. So we're going to pop out our red here. I'm going to take off my little protective covering, and we'll squeeze this back into our bowl. And there's only a tiny bit here, but really this will be way too much once we thin it down. So you're just going to take some water, and you want to use just a little bit at a time in the very beginning, because if you use too much, then it's going to just get too watery. So I usually just take a little tip, little decorating tip, and just sprinkle some water in there, not too much. Then we'll take our spatula and stir it up. It needs a little more, and that's okay. So we'll get a little bit more here. And when you're finally done thinning it down, you will see that this color flow or royal icing is kind of like a thick syrup. That's what you're looking for. You want to be able to grab some and drop it back in, and this is not dropping, so you know it's still too thick. And when it drops back in, you want to be able to count to 7 and not be able to see where that drop is. It's completely combined back into the original stuff in there. So, okay. You don't want it to be too watery or thin, or else it will break through your borders and not set up well. If it's nice and stiff, okay, here we go. So this is good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's great. If it's too thin, it's not going to dry stiff enough, and it will break on you. Okay, so now we're going to take our bag. We're going to cuff it, and then we're going to put it over this little cup here and leave an opening, and that way I can use 2 hands to help pour this into my bag and not have to worry about it spilling, falling out everywhere. So we're going to pour this in there. You want to make sure that you've stirred it well enough so that there's no clumps of stiff icing in there. You want it to be completely stirred up and thinned down. Now we'll take our bag out. Okay, and we'll get our pattern back here. We'll snip off the tip. I'm just going to snip off a little bit of this tip because I don't want, you can use another decorating tip to pipe this out through, especially to get those tiny little corners, but if you cut off just enough of this, then it works out just fine. Okay, so now I'm going to pipe this, flow it into here, and you want it to be nice and puffy. Puff up just above your border, but not too much so that it's going to fall out, spill out on you. You can see that's just so nice and smooth and puffy. You can use this for cookies. You can use it on your cakes. You'll just want to make sure that this dries hard enough before you put it on your cake, not only to prevent it from cracking and breaking when you take it off, but royal icing or color flow does not like grease. Any kind of grease from your buttercream icing, anything like that will break it down. So if you're working with royal icing or color flow, looks like I've got a little stiff part here that didn't get all the way mixed in. You want to pop that out. You don't want to try to force it out, or else you're going to get some accidents, some whoops moments. Okay. So what was I saying before? You want to make sure that there's no grease or anything coming in contact with this royal icing or color flow. Okay. Just a tad bit more. There we go. Okay. You can't really add extra icing just into this to make it thicker. It's all just going to thin down really well. So, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Looks like it needs a little more water, but I'm actually going to pipe it in this way. Too stiff is not bad. Too thin is pretty bad. So I just want to make sure that this yellow does not get too thin, or else it's going to bleed into the red that's already here. Okay, so we've got our cup. We'll pour this into there. And you can see already it is a little bit stiffer than the red, and that's okay. Put that aside. Now there are more details and places that different colors and things like that go with for this pattern that I'm doing. And so again, I'm just going to let it dry and come back and pipe on those details and things. I don't have to worry about it right now. Okay, so we're going to pipe in our yellow and just let it puff up and fall into those spots where it needs to be. There we go. I guess I should correct myself. I said that too thick is not bad, too thin is. You can get too thick with this. If you get too thick with it, it will not flow into itself and dry really smoothly. You will see all the little bumps and things like that. If it does seem a little stiff and you want to help smooth it all out before it completely dries, you can take your pattern and just kind of gently tap it like this on the table or your surface, and it will help everything kind of settle in and look better and everything. So we've got our little pattern here. Now, before I put this aside to let it dry, one special thing you want to do with your color flow is you're going to go around it and just create big dots of color flow or royal icing like this. And you want the dots to be kind of matching the thickness of your pattern here. And what these are going to be your tester dots. When you're done and you think your pattern is dry, rather than trying to pull it off and break it because it's not completely dry, you can pick off one of these little tester dots and see if it's completely dry. If it's not completely dry in the middle, then you've saved yourself from breaking your pattern that you've spent so much time and effort on. So we're going to set this aside. I'm going to show you our finished pattern here. I took it off the cake board, so that's why I'm not lifting it up. But this one I did on parchment paper, and as you can see, these tester dots are just coming right off, falling right off practically, because they are completely dry. So I know that I've gotten everything completely dry. So I'm going to take these tester dots off here. And then for taking your pattern off, most likely it will not come off as easily as the tester strips did, or tester dots, because it's just a lot larger. So I'm going to take this and scoot it close to the edge, pulling down on the paper as this comes off. And as it's coming off, I can feel underneath that it is not completely dry. But we're going to go ahead and peel this guy off just so you can see what it looks like. But that's okay because most of it is dry, so it will be okay. Okay, so we've peeled this off. So you can see on the inside here it's still kind of tacky and sticky, but we've got our little icing plaque. So you can even make this stand up on the cake if you want, because it's dry like that. I did my words again backwards, and that's because I wanted a flatter look to my letters. So I can just, oops, snap those off, and I broke this little thing. Okay, so one of my students, her name is, or she's in one of my cake decorating classes, Aileen, and she wanted to know for my cake shows and everything, what would I do in an oops moment like this? So this is broken apart because it's not completely dry, but that's okay. I would just lay it down on the cake and then lay it down like this really close, and you can take some of that icing and smooth it over the crack if you want. It'll dry really nicely. You won't even see it. And most of the time, even if it has a crack there, it'll be just fine. It'll look great. So I would just go ahead and snap off my letters and put my letters on the right way so that they would face the right direction. And that's what you have. So this has been a really fun show for me. I hope you've had a lot of fun too, showing you 3 different techniques for putting an icing pattern onto your cake, whether it's through piping gel or if it's a frozen buttercream pattern transfer or something like this that is royal icing or color flow plaque. I hope you've had a lot of fun. You can look at my website for more ideas. You can contact me at apieceofcake21@gmail.com with all your questions or comments. Please feel free to contact me. I really want to know what you think and what you'd like to know. So I hope you've had a great day. I sure have, and we'll see you next time. Woohoo!